Okay, hello and welcome everyone to today's event on AT Automation and Dynamics NAV. We'll be looking at new data on NAV customer reviews and experiences. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MS Dynamics World, and I'm hosting today's event. We will be sharing some brand new findings from a recent poll of Dynamics ERP users, and I'll be talking with Diana Egan of Esker about the results and some of the broader implications for businesses that are using Dynamics NAV. Okay, so I want to do a bit of housekeeping as we get started and review the overall agenda. We do welcome your feedback today. You can use the Q&A block to the right of the main presentation window to ask questions at any time. We'll be taking at least a couple of breaks for questions from you. So we look forward to that. And as we look at the data, comments are also welcome. We'll also be setting aside time in the second half of today's event to have Diana present for a few minutes about Esker's services and solutions, and we'll be taking more questions at the end before we wrap up. So it should be a fun and interesting hour, and I'm excited to get started. First, let me just formally introduce Diana Egan. She's a sales director at Esker. Diana, welcome.
Hi, Jason. Thank you. Welcome. Pleasure to be here today. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you, and we do want to move on to really diving into some of those survey results. For folks who perhaps have participated in that survey or interested in what it was, we compiled data from the survey in March of this year. MS Dynamics World designed and ran the survey. We collected input from 72 Dynamics ERP users, GPAX and NAV. And that's what we're going to be drawing on for the next 20-25 minutes of the event here as we look at some of those results. We're going to be primarily looking at the NAV-specific slice of the data, because obviously there are variations in the kinds of answers that people gave depending on the kinds of solutions they have. I mean, overall, let's just take a quick look at some of the overall sort of response data that we had in terms of like company size, as you can see here. So really a range of companies. The largest segment, we're in that 100 to 499 employee range, and also a range of sort of AP or invoice volume from the respondents. A good chunk, almost half, receive less than 500 invoices a month, but a sizable, almost half are seeing 500 to 2,000 invoices per month. So certainly a range of volumes there among the different companies that participated. Now, for NAV specifically, NAV participants in the study told us, they typically have, over 80% have 1 to 5 people managing accounts payable and processing of invoices. As you can imagine, when it came to AX, for example, there were some much larger teams. But for NAV, obviously, this is what we found, and I think it's probably not a huge surprise that it would be smaller teams given the type of companies that tend to run NAV. Okay, so we asked what kinds of invoice formats people are receiving, and this is, again, NAV-specific data, but over 80% of participants said they are still receiving paper invoices. Same percentage, I should say, are receiving email invoices. I was a little surprised that for NAV customers, we didn't see a slightly higher uptake on electronic or EDI receipt of invoices. It was actually a number that was 7% or so lower than the overall rate that respondents gave in terms of receiving electronic invoices, as compared to when you take into account all the GP and the AX participants as well. So, question here for you, Diana, when you're trying to plan for, efficiency of invoice processing and the way you receive them, are there certain assumptions about if you're receiving paper and maybe a significant amount of paper still in your organization, there's certain assumptions or constraints that you should be prepared for if you are managing those day-to-day efforts.
Yeah, sure, Jason. I mean, the survey results don't surprise me. It's very consistent with what I see in a day in and day out basis, that the culture of traditional paper-based invoice processing and management, it's still very much alive and well in many AP departments today. I would say that a significant dent can be made to fill in these gaps with these constraints of paper-based or email-based too, because that's still a very manual process. Some dents can be made into this through automation, but certainly managers in finance should be aware that when it comes to paper, your staff is dedicating just too much of their time to manually sorting and handling the invoices. For many of you, especially for those of you who might be in manufacturing environments, have many years of invoices stored in file cabinets for audits. There's transportation, physical archiving expenses. Of course, the paper, presents trouble accurately capturing the data regardless, of the invoice format. Really low visibility, very limited analytics, limited reporting, certainly frustrations in trying to connect accounting and procurement functions when it's, either paper-based or maybe sitting on a network folder someplace or in someone's inbox. Of course, difficulty taking advantage of, early pay discounts, some poor oversight of spend with both PO and non-PO based suppliers. I mean, those are just a few of the constraints that are created in organizations today when it's very paper-based or manual, even with email.
And you dive into some of the more specific challenges that we will be touching on some of the other data points here, but yeah, a lot of potential areas to look at. So it might be worth moving on. I wanted to talk about sort of some of the themes like, incentivizing vendors to move toward electronic methods of invoice delivery, including email. I also want to touch on some views on OCR, which I think you hinted at there, but let's move on here to another finding. And what we really we're looking at here was, how you're managing your AP process. And I thought this was particularly interesting in the context of NAV responses. You see sort of the most common was entirely paper-based, followed by a blend of paper-based activity and NAV AP functionality. Even fewer were saying they use the Dynamics NAV AP functionality specifically, and then a small percentage are already using a paperless solution. From your perspective, how important is it if you're an NAV customer to be using the basic AP capabilities, the out-of-the-box capabilities of ERP when you're thinking about improvements to the software and the process? Is that really a prerequisite to be exploring that first?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily mandatory, but it is important that it should be your system of record. I mean, AP automation isn't meant, or it shouldn't be meant, to replace NAV. I mean, NAV should absolutely be your system of record for payment and supplier master and tax and all the wonderful things that it's capable of. Again, AP automation is meant to kind of fill in the gaps where manual process and lack of visibility exist. And this is what I hear from my NAV customers, and that's, despite all of the value within the AP functionality, it lacks, just like, every other ERP out there, it lacks the capability to handle all of the, the manual information, and has constraints, to get the data inside the system. It lacks intelligent workflow. It lacks capturing the information and automatically populating the system. So again, although it's fantastic for streamlining the process, again, it just doesn't take into consideration all the documents that need to be manually received and entered in the system and then sent to different receivers. And, you know, frankly, the more partners, distributors an organization has, the more paper that must be, you know, printed, retrieved, faxed, mailed, photocopied, archived, making the process longer for finance and certainly more error prone. So to your question, you know, is it a prerequisite? You know, certainly not absolutely a prerequisite, but something that organizations should do. They should maximize their current investment and then kind of fill in the gaps, if you were, with automation.
Okay, and you know, I was looking at this sort of the order in which these fell into place on this particular chart and thinking, you know, are these kind of the right order of operation? I guess you're saying there are a lot of considerations to take into account in terms of, you know, what your own organization is doing today to handle some of those challenges you talked about. It's not necessarily a simple progression from pure paper to dynamic to.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it really depends on the reason for looking into automation in the first place. You know, if you need better workflow, better approval process, and you're just kind of looking to get rid of the actual physical paper, you know, that's an easy step. There's not necessarily a need for OCR, you know, as the traditional technology of just OCR. You know, however, if you're looking to identify early payment discounts, you know, certainly that's a little bit higher up there because now we had to look at prioritization and early capture and taking a look at those due dates and the report issue and such. So you're right. I think you're spot on that, you know, it's a progression in terms of how we need to look at it to evolve into automation.
Okay, yeah, and we'll be looking at some of those particular business challenges in a few minutes here. You did mention OCR, and I wanted to maybe touch on that a bit more here before we moved on. You know, are there particular metrics or thresholds that that do suggest that OCR it should be a priority in your view?
You know, first of all, I want to address kind of the term OCR. You know, OCR is a term people kind of throw around a lot, and sometimes it drives me crazy because when you're looking at kind of automation in general, it's so much more than just OCR. OCR in and of itself is just capturing an image of something. It's just the electronic version of it. When you're talking about automation, it's not just the OCR, it's all this other technology kind of bundled with it, where it actually is looking at the document, it's, you know, capturing the information, it's intelligently validating the line item levels of what the information is. So, you know, to look at kind of that threshold, well, the good news is that, you know, when you're looking at a kind of a cloud-based solution, say like Esker's, you know, the cost of the investment is purely based on the usage of the system. So let's say, for example, you know, if you only do, you know, 400 invoices a month, there absolutely is an ROI in that, especially if you have absolutely no visibility into your current process, or you're paying late, or you're missing early pay discounts, or, you know, the list kind of goes on and on. So in terms of a specific threshold, again, it really depends on what you're looking to accomplish. But organizations like ours, and possibly others do too, but, you know, we provide what we call it kind of a foundation solution, where it's you know, a set of features that have already been put together that the vast majority of people in AP need for their organization, and we offer that in a small business format. We offer that in a global business format. So in terms of that threshold and you know, what that needs to be, the nice thing is, you know, you're really going to only pay for what you use. So I would say even at the lower ends, it's something to definitely investigate.
Great. And for the NAV customers on the line here today. I'd love to hear through the Q&A or even through the chat if you've had experiences or ways of figuring out for your own business what some of those criteria have been. I think other folks on the line would really enjoy hearing that too. There was a question. We will be, I think Diana will be going into some more detail about some of the automation that ESCO provides and some of the automation options in a little while as well. But let's move on to another finding here. So this was one asking about the time it takes to process a single AP invoice. We asked about timeliness, and it was one of the data points that I think has generated the most discussion this week as we've looked at responses from AX, GP, and now NAV users. We looked at it separately for AX and GP earlier in the week. In reviewing some of these results, it suggests that there's a lot more going on than any one of these columns really tells a full story on. Like the 1 to 5 day range could still suggest big variations in processing time, and there's also questions given the high number of people who said they're still purely on a paper-based approach today. So it's the kind of metric I think we definitely want to dig into more in the future. I can just say in terms of our own plans. But Diana, do you find that people think about the time it takes? And when they do talk about that generally, are they taking into account, for example, wasted time or when it's maybe not at the perfect starting point, or do you tend to see these being very optimistic figures in general when you have conversations with NAV users?
Yeah, well, these are a bit optimistic. Often they don't think about that, the wasted time, until the bottlenecks become so great they're forced to. Nearly everyone I've spoken to in this business has those handful of business approvers where the invoices just sit in their inbox or on their desk, and they have no visibility, and sometimes it's weeks before they get anything. I think organizations are open to moving to a centralized process where accounts payable is obviously receiving that first while others are not. The ones who are not open to it don't want to add additional work to AP's job by receiving and routing the invoices. I think they need to consider the bigger picture. I mean, what impact having invoices going to the buyer, is going to have on the company, and weigh those benefits against adding a step in the process for AP, but gaining a lot of instant visibility and possibly avoiding all these late payments and such. So the 1 to 5, I think is a bit optimistic. I mean, with the level of, manual steps and keying in and reviewing coding and the business approvers, and especially I hear a lot if we're manually doing the three-way match with your goods receipts and with your POs. I mean, all of that stuff is just taking so much time. So as much as I'd like to say 1 to 5 days is happening, realistically, with the folks that we're talking to, it's probably somewhere in that 10 to 20 days generally, or even more, that I'm seeing that's more common.
For companies that are on that slower end currently and maybe are kind of already acknowledging it, if they're looking at solutions like yours to help them, are they typically already identifying risks or identifying sort of pain points or issues that they're facing as an organization when they are in that zone, or are there ones that maybe you pick out that companies don't even notice?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, the missed payment discounts is other various treasury-related issues, but for most organizations we talk to, when you get into that 30-day realm, for most companies, checks are typically cut only, maybe once a week. So if you have a 30-day plus invoice processing cycle, and you're on a net 30 terms, you're either need to hurry up and get that process on the front end to make that payment, or you're going to be paying late. There's just so many steps and manual steps in the processing of this that it's for sure, pushing things out and causing some disruption, but it's got a bad opportunity cost. It's what you're missing out on. You're missing out on some of those discounts, and you're missing out on developing some of those supplier relationships and being able to be in a better negotiating stance by paying those after 30 days.
And we have an interesting comment here that, if you're using NAV, it's more like one day if you don't have approvers, and that raises, I guess, an interesting consideration with or without approvers. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, even if you're a full PO-based organization or you don't need any business approvers, you still have challenges for sure, because again, it's rare to see, and if you are, kudos to you, because your process should be replicated. But again, most people are manually doing that three-way match between the invoice, the purchase order, and the goods receipt. So that's still an AP clerk having to sit down and look at that Excel spreadsheet or again, your system of record to do that manually. And it still takes them, sending out emails to the appropriate people. Did you receive this? Did you not? Etc. So, yeah, even if you don't need the traditional kind of non-PO'd approver workflow, it's still a very time-consuming and manual process for our NAV customers.
Excellent. And thanks for the comment from the audience. So one last area I wanted to look at here, as time allows, is this list of the challenges that NAV customers say they're facing related to their AP process. The results were fairly unique, actually, with invoice and PO status right up there with posting of month-end accruals. And whereas, for example, GP customers rated processing of the invoices in a timely manner as a top challenge, that barely ranked fourth here. For NAV customers. So, Diana, we talked about invoice processing times earlier, but what does the invoice status challenge say, if anything, about NAV?
Certainly it's a big challenge because, right now there's very little visibility into those status changes. I hear that from a lot of our NAV customers, their suppliers get very frustrated because they do a lot of inbound calls, they do a lot of emails to determine where payment is and get a status update on those types of things. So it's happening both internally and externally with the supplier. And I think that one of the greatest values in a NAV customer looking at automation is when you can have a supplier portal where they can go on and they can look at the status of a particular invoice and see where it's at in the process. It's a huge value. Also, with workflow management, you can get status internally to determine where things are at as well. If, again, if we're looking at that PO, non-PO, if you do need approvers, where it's at in the process and has it been approved and, where's it at to posting and those types of things. So, yeah, again, it does not surprise me when it looks at the survey results and the biggest challenges. The status and, month-end accrual reporting, very, very common, as well as two. I mean, I'll go with the top three here because I'm hearing these consistently, with early pay discounts, by capturing info before a document has even been presented to your AP clerk. I mean, with automation, you can prioritize all that based on due date and particular supplier and et cetera for priority to ensure that all of those are captured early and maximized. So again, this information extremely consistent overall with what we hear.
Yeah, I imagine prioritization would be key. I mean, can prioritization extend to sort of when you have favorable terms with a particular supplier, if you can prioritize it and process it in a certain number of days. Is that
Yeah,
is that one way that?
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you can maintain, you know, high supplier status, pay your bills on time, well, I mean, there's just positive for everybody involved. Or paying at the right time. You know, there's certainly some advantages of early pay discounts. It gives you some buying power when you have the visibility to look at all of your spend and all of your invoices and what you're buying from particular suppliers. There's just an unlimited amount of value, and it puts you in a position to make better decisions. That's really what it does.
Okay, great. Well, I'm looking at the time here. I do want to move on to the next portion of today's event and give you the floor, Diana. Are there any other notes you would call out here? I think we've touched on a lot of the different challenges.
No, I think that we'll talk through a couple of those. I want to look at the just at a very high level the escrow automation solution. We'll talk about how some of these, you know, these late pay issues can be addressed. Again, there were, you know, accrual reporting issues can be addressed. You know, justifying the investment, those types of things. We can talk about all that here in the next maybe 20 minutes or so.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks for the input from the audience so far. And Diana, I've given you presenter control, so yeah, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Can you see my presentation?
We do.
Fantastic. Well, if you're not familiar with Esker, I'll give you my 20-second commercial, if you will. We have a worldwide presence. We've been in the business over 30 years. Very large, very diverse customer base. We work with organizations in nearly every vertical, from some of the top Fortune organizations to very small independent businesses. What's important, I think, to take away in terms of Esker's capability is, you know, we're processing over 40 million documents a month. So there's a lot of information coming through Esker, a lot of customer data coming through Esker, and we certainly try to use that to continue to develop and build upon and improve our solutions as the business changes. You know, finance leaders typically look to Esker when they're experiencing maybe one of these 5 things. These are generally the greatest obstacles that we hear from our Dynamics, you know, customers. Processing delays, you know, some accuracy issues, lack of visibility, you know, difficulty when it comes to audit time, having to manually retrieve all that information, not being found in one place. But generally, this is the value that they find. There are a lot of benefits just in general on automation. You know, automation promotes, on average, about 65% faster processing. By the way, that's not just the high end. You know, on average, it's usually somewhere between 50 to 65%. So there's a lot of impact to introduce something like automation. Frankly, most customers that we work with find the greatest value in visibility, making sure that you can see the entire process from the minute the invoice comes into the organization, regardless of format, all the way through posting into NAV. There are certainly some very specific and key benefits for automation that complement NAV. I had mentioned earlier, you know, I don't want to replace NAV. NAV's a fantastic solution. What I want to do is kind of, like I mentioned, fill in the gaps. We want to take away that manual workflow. We want to take away the manual data entry. We want to take away all that manual report compiling that you're not getting right now in NAV and kind of work around that. But then provide all of that information for NAV and deliver it into NAV so there's seamless integration with NAV as well. So again, lots of key benefits. These are just a few that I would definitely want to highlight. You know, at a very high level, why don't we just kind of take a minute, talk about, you know, what automation looks like as a solution. Generally, it first starts with, document capture. You can either locally or centrally receive paper-based or scanned invoices, emailed invoices, fax invoices. They're immediately sent to Esker for processing according to kind of predefined rules matched to the invoice attributes. So the supplier, the amount, the buying entity, etc. That information is scanned or the electronic documents are captured and are automatically routed and prioritized. So this is all happening real time and literally, a matter of seconds. The intelligent data extraction, verification, and validation happens next. So I mentioned this kind of compilation of a bunch of different types of technologies, not just OCR. It's intelligent capture technology. Esker extracts all the relevant invoice information, company name, invoice number, due date, line item details, those types of things. Esker relies on automating the data verification, data, validation checks, and all of these things against all of the accurate information that you already have in NAV. So it's taking a look at the information, then it's looking at NAV and saying, yes, that is the correct supplier name, that's their correct address, etc. Capture data can be automatically checked using either a two-way or a three-way match against any existing, PO. If no exception is detected, what we typically call kind of a touchless processing can create the invoice for payment without the need for user validation. Non-PO'd invoices can undergo multi-level review, coding, approval. If the capture isn't 100% accurate, so maybe someone sent you a really bad fax. We've all received, the fax with a big line down the center. We have functionalities called teach functionality that can be used in the solution to recognize the data for similar invoices from suppliers in the past. So there's just a lot of really smart, intelligent technology handling, doing the exception handling. Of course, there's payment approval. Once the data is validated, either automatically or by a user, the invoice is posted into NAV. The doc image is indexed to the Esker server or any other archive that you want. Users can be notified of invoice entering status, even if you'd like that. And then, of course, the invoice creation and document archiving. So when audit time comes, or in a case of maybe a dispute over an invoice, the original document image, the corresponding audit trail, the history of modifications, it's all readily available to authorized users to look at it at any time. So I know I'm a fairly visual person. Sometimes for me it takes kind of seeing things to get my arms around them, but we don't have a ton of time to do a live demonstration. So I just wanted at a very high level show you a few of the advantages that our customers have received in some of the features that they are using on a day-to-day basis. First one would be dashboards. I mean, it shows key information at a glance, really kind of the pulse of what's going on in AP. It allows very quick user access. You can get your real-time KPIs, very meaningful analytics. It all comes standard in a solution like this where it's all customizable. Your controller and your AP manager and even your CFO can have very different views than your AP clerk. They have AP specialists would have instant access to their current workload, number of invoices to approve. Those have been prioritized. Number of invoices on hold, who are still out there, what invoices are still waiting for approval, just a ton of functionality to help them in their day. And then there's the document manager. This is where your AP specialists would have their view set up however they want, whether you want certain invoices coming in a certain specialist based on geographic location or vendor amount. It's very easily customizable and all can be filtered. So as you can see here, this is a list of this particular AP specialist invoices to review. So once they would choose to open a particular invoice, the validation screen would pop up, and on the left side you see all the information that's been automatically extracted from the image. So the original image of the invoice is always on the right. So with Esker, different invoice formats are all very easily handled without any need a template. So there's no templates of any kind. So I mentioned this OCR and patented freeform intelligent capture technology. It's all embedded into the solution. It allows you to kind of easily deal with content from all different diverse invoice types, from all types of transports. So the capture isn't just from email-based invoices, and I'm going to make a point on that, because if you are evaluating automation vendors at this point, please make sure that they handle more than just email-based invoices. You saw the survey results. In an ideal world, it would be fantastic if you were receiving all your invoices via email, but unfortunately, it just doesn't always happen. So make sure that when you're looking at it, you're finding a provider who can handle, all types of inputs: EDI, email, fax, scanned mail, etc. There are automatic data checks to feel confident in the data extraction. So in this example, after verifying against your supplier master and NAV, it identified a balance inconsistency in this one, and this is how it would look to your AP clerk. There's three-way matching for PO'd invoices. Again, we can do two- and three-way. That verifies that the quantity and the price invoiced matched open PO line item, the PO line item. So you would see if there was an inconsistency. You saw earlier in the survey results that accruals and handling accruals, especially accrual reporting at the end of the month, is something that's an obstacle for a lot of organizations. I hear that all the time. We configure accrual report specifically for each customer we have, because everyone accrues differently. So, on our end, it's just a matter of changing the filters in the report so it reflects what you would need. So this is an example of an automated scheduled report to run. Most, of our Dynamics customers have it created in an Excel or CSV file so it can be automatically imported into NAV. Because of Esker's three types of technology, we're able to accrue automatically via a single report. So most customers don't need to accrue PO'd invoices, but if you do, we have that covered, because we have all the PO information, including the GL codes and company codes and so on. But as for non-PO'd invoices, we use a combination of what's most recently used, so the last invoice for that supplier or for that coder and approver. And Esker teach technology, like I mentioned, and line item allocation tables to enable the accurate accrual reporting from within Esker, a huge value that a lot of customers seem to love. Here's a list to just, again, high level of the features that come with NAV integration with Esker. The integration supports multi-currencies, multi-languages, multi-company implementations. But if you were looking specifically for integration into NAV, we can absolutely show you this in a demonstration. Certainly you can contact us, and we'll make sure that the information is provided at the end. But we can actually show you what this would look like too. So for non-PO'd invoices, I mentioned the automatic workflow based on your business approval process with easy-to-use approver access. So this is all set up internally. We can do it by a lot of different methods. It can be by cost center. It can be by approver. It can be by total amount. There's a lot of different things that we can do to set up your approval hierarchy if you need approvers for invoices in your organization. So why don't we just take a quick look at how this process looks with NAV. So the AP clerk would go into the document manager, which you just saw, which you're looking at. You would, click to open an invoice, and this screen pops up. The invoice, like I mentioned, is on the right. The information dynamically captured is on the left. Once approved and submitted, it hits your list of posted invoices. Here's the detail of that posted invoice. And then that Dynamics NAV generated invoice number also gets sent back to Esker solution. So in the future, if you need to search within Esker, you can search by, either the invoice number or many of the other searchable fields. Everything you see on the left is all searchable. And of course, in our day and age, AP automation wouldn't be as effective if you couldn't provide your approvers, your executives with mobile access. Now there's no more excuses for feedback or unapproved invoices. They can easily view what needs to be approved, the image, any questions, possibly the AP clerk posed. They can review coding and payment for each of the line items. Approve, reject, put it on hold, what have you. Executives, love the ease of the app, and frankly, AP loves the turnaround time by having easy access to the invoicing. And then archiving. I hear a lot of this, especially from our NAV customers. It gets really costly. If you are on an older version of NAV, server-based solution, and you don't want to archive a ton inside your existing system, archive kind of cloud is a wonderful option. You can also use it later to pull all the invoices and information, again, if you're running reporting for auditors. Normally, our NAV customers, they want a link within the record in NAV that takes them to the cloud to view a particular invoice, and that's something that's used quite often. Then I had mentioned a supplier portal earlier. Suppliers are invited to join their supplier portal, which also comes with the solution, to get immediate access to new business. So they're up and running simply by just setting up their password. So suppliers can upload invoices straight from the portal so that invoices are directly available for verification and processing on your end. So, your company, your users can see at a glance, the part of the invoices that are coming directly from the portal. So we looked at the survey results earlier and talked about, the various types of invoices still coming in. If you don't want to force your suppliers to send you via email, or their resistance, because frankly, not all of us are Walmart. We can't all require or force someone to send you an invoice in a particular way. I mean, if you can, that's fantastic. But generally, we as businesses, we often will buy from smaller organizations, and they're not going to be individually emailing out different invoices. This gives them a different option. You certainly can ask them to post their invoices into the supplier portal, and the value to that is it gives them visibility now. So if they're going to post what traditionally might have been a paper-based invoice, or frankly even an email-based invoice, they can post it into their supplier portal, and then they can track where it's at in the process, and as the status changes. So again, a nice value added for your suppliers, and something that's offered kind of standard as our automation solution. So I know I just very, very quickly ran through at a very high level what an automation solution from Esker would look like. Certainly there's a lot of other capabilities, and we didn't have a lot of time to kind of go through all of that today. But I would recommend, if you want to go to esker.com, esker.com, you certainly can request a demonstration or request additional information specific to NAV as well. And hopefully, if you want more information, we can get you, set up to schedule to look at it real soon. So with that, you know what, Jason, I'm open for questions if we want to take a few right now.
All right, great. So yeah, I mean, one of the questions was about possibly getting a trial of Esker's solution and testing the integration with NAV.
Yeah, contact us. I mean, we can talk about your current environment and your current system and your current needs, and then yeah, we can talk about you taking a look at the solution.
All right. I could put up Diana. I could put up your contact information if you want.
Yeah, that'd be, well, you know what, like I said, I would say if you can just, you know, contact Esker if you know, you want to jot down the telephone number, I can give that right now. The number, you know, at Esker is 800-368-5283. You certainly can send an email to info@esker.com as well. We'd be happy to hear from you. And if you're looking for something very specific or you have a very specific challenge, maybe it's even very consistent with what you saw in the survey results today, we'd be happy to talk to you about it and see if this might be a fit for you or not.
All right. Let's see. There was one more question here I wanted to hopefully find. So I guess I'm going to try to summarize this question, but in terms of showing how NAV can be automated, is there anything else you would add in terms of automation options, either that NAV customers should be looking at in the native product, or I don't know, other examples of automation that you think are key for people to take away?
Yeah, I would say the one area that I am often seeing that is underutilized, and that is the purchasing workflow. If you are generating POs out of NAV, fantastic. Where things seem to fall apart is the workflow in terms of the purchasing requisition process. I'm still hearing a lot from NAV customers that, you know, the purchasing requisition process is still, you know, going back and forth in emails, right? And all of that is outside of NAV, and it's not being captured. And that whole approval process for buying is being missed. So I would say if right now, maybe at the very least, you're just creating POs in NAV, and that's all you're doing, I would say it probably behooves you to look at a purchasing type of automation, because it's very inexpensive, and it fills in a lot of those gaps where if you have, you know, uncontrolled spend or rogue buyers in your company, or you're just looking to tighten up your process, or ideally get to that point where it is all PO'd to make the processing much more effective, it's something I would look at for sure.
Okay, another question here. How accurate is the image capture in terms of finding the key info from the invoice 100% of the time without requiring human intervention?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd mentioned earlier and alluded to something that Esker has. It's called Teach technology. So let me I'll explain it kind of at a high level. With every supplier invoice, it has the ability to be 100% accurate. And let me explain why. So let's say you get a supplier invoice today, and it's a crazy formatted supplier invoice, and you know, they cut off half the information and they put it in different places, and you know, we've all seen those types of invoices. What happens is the system itself, with the dynamic capture and the OCR and all these other technologies, is going to recognize everything that it can. And if something hasn't been captured, it's automatically going to be flagged, and your AP clerk is going to see there's this big red band around it. For example, earlier when it showed there was an issue with tax. So when something isn't consistent, isn't accurate, it's going to have a big red band around it, and it's going to say basically low confidence. There's either nothing here, or what we have captured, we need you to look at. So what Teach technology does is say, okay, I am going to, with my mouse, I am going to virtually circle where this information on the document can be found. Okay, so I'm going to do that every time on that document where maybe the accuracy is questionable. So a couple different places. And now, the next time that supplier sends you an invoice, it's going to know exactly where that information is. So if they're compiling an invoice number with their own unique identifying number, or their product information is different from your product information, etc., how it's captured. You can teach it to know where it's finding the information. So when I say it can get 100% accurate, it can get 100% accurate. Is it going to be 100% accurate out of the gate, all documents? No. And if anyone tells you it can, if any vendor out there tells you it can, it's not true. It just isn't. But what it does do is gives you the ability to be 100% accurate. So, and again, very long-winded, unfortunately, response. I apologize, but the confidence level out of the gate for most, OCR-type intelligent capture solutions is usually somewhere between 60 and 85%. But then with Teach, it obviously can get to 100%.
Okay, great question. I think a follow-up here, when it's integrating into NAV and posting, does it post as a receipt and invoice for a PO?
And the answer is yes. We can post it how you have yours configured. There's some organizations who don't want it automatically posted. So it can be posted as receipt, it can be posted, there's a lot of different configurations. It just depends on what you need. The goal is, though, that once that information is sent to NAV, all of the data is pristine. So NAV becomes your system of record. So all of the inaccuracies that have been found, there's no possibility for duplicate payment. All the information is there, all the attached ancillary documentation that you can send with the invoice. You can put with it and archive it into the system with a link. So there's a lot of things that you can do. So that determines where you want that information. I mean, we can map it in a couple different places, so it just depends on what your organization needs.
All right, great question. With that, I think we're at the end of our question queue. I'll make maybe a last call here. I want to remind folks we really value your input on this kind of session and the information that was presented. You'll see a survey that pops up as you leave today, and any feedback you can give us about the event would be greatly appreciated. I would appreciate it. I know Diana would as well. I'm not seeing any other questions, so we will begin to wrap up here. Well, I guess the main thing I want to do is thank the audience for your questions and your attention, and also Diana, thank you for participating and providing so much input and sharing so many ideas with us.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate everyone and the questions today. Thanks so much. We look forward to hearing from you.
Great, and we did record today's session. We'll be making that available soon, and with that, we will end the event. Have a great day, everyone.